Eliane from Patchwork and Poodles, and welcome to Hand Quilting 101. We're going to cover all the basics that you need to know to be successful at big stitch hand quilting. Just a quick note before we begin. I really recommend, if you are brand new to big stitch hand quilting, to start with a small project. For example, this Christmas stocking here. You can make placemats, you can make the stocking, you can make pillows, throw pillows, anything smaller, a mug rug, just to get the feel of hand quilting before you commit to a really big quilt. It also helps to just understand how you maneuver the fabric, and then you're not dealing with layers and layers of fabric as you will be with a big quilt. So something to keep in mind, even a wall hanging or baby size quilt is a good starting project to jump into hand quilting. Another option is to add hand quilting as accents to a mostly machine quilted quilt. So this is part of my Misty Mountains quilt. You'll notice that most of it has been quilted by machine, and then there's some hand quilted lines in between for some accent and some texture. So this is also a really good way to start out because it allows you to be able to have a quilt that is secured by your quilting, so you're not worrying about anything shifting, and really allow you to play with hand quilting and not worry about a whole bunch of other things. So those are some things to keep in mind as you're starting out. Small projects as accent quilting on a mostly machine quilted project, and then definitely as your skill grows and as your confidence grows, you're able to tackle big quilts, all 100% hand quilted. The biggest quilt that I have hand quilted is a queen size quilt, which currently lives on our bed. So with that, let's talk about materials. You're going to need the quilt that you want to quilt. Today I am going to show you on this wall hanging size of my Bear Path quilt pattern. This pattern is available in my shop, so you can find it if you click on the link in the description below. This is a good size to start out with. It's a 26 by 26 inch square, and so it's going to allow us to be able to play with hand quilting, play with moving the quilt around without worrying about it being too big. I have gone ahead and basted my quilt top to my batting and my backing. I've gotten everything ready to go. I really prefer to spray baste, especially when hand quilting. I'm not worrying about my thread getting snagged by safety pins or anything like that. So my preference is spray basting. I have also thread basted quilts, which I also like to do. And you can use pins. If you're going to use pins, I would try to plan out your quilting first, then place your pins in accordance where they're not going to be in the way of your quilting. So for this one, for example, I'm going to quilt right near these points. I know I want to do that. So if I was going to put pins, I might put a pin here, one right in the middle. I wouldn't want to put one here where it might interfere. So that's that note. You're going to want to mark your quilt top for quilting. So my favorite tools for marking are Hera markers and chalk pencils. I really like this General's brand of pastel chalk. The benefit of this is it's the best one that I've found that really leaves a good mark that you can see, and it doesn't disappear when I rub it vigorously. This is important because if you're going to be marking your quilt for the design that you want to hand quilt on there, you don't want halfway through to go, well, where'd my line go? Like, what happened to these lines I drew? They disappeared. So this brand is really nice because they stay, but once you add some water to them, they disappear. One note too is that I like the 4414 white and the 4473 light gray. I wouldn't recommend any other color. These two are the ones that come out really nicely and wash out really nicely. The gray I use on any lighter colors, the white obviously on any darker colors. I also really love my Hera markers. This is a Clover brand Hera marker. Essentially, it's a plastic blunt knife, and when you have your ruler and you draw a line with your ruler, it leaves a crease. You're able to see that crease and be able to stitch on it or next to it, or whatever you're doing with it. And again, this also, once you wash it, the creases disappear, so it's something that's not going to last on your quilt. I really stress every time that I'm doing anything, marking my quilt. My preference is to go for tools that wash out easily. I get worried with things like water-soluble markers that if you expose them to heat at any point, they could potentially stay on your project forever, and so that would be really sad. So these are the ones that I like. Definitely experiment. If you don't have a hair marker, a good way to see if you're gonna like it is to take a butter knife and that back edge of a butter knife and to mark with that. So try that out, see how it works. Okay, so once you've got your quilt, you've marked your quilt, I already told you we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna follow these half square triangles. So I'm not gonna go ahead and mark, I'm gonna eyeball it. But when I get into these parts here of my little log cabin block, I would then go ahead and mark whatever lines I was planning on stitching. We need some thread. There's definitely different threads that you can buy for hand quilting, big stitch hand quilting. You're looking for thread that's 8 weight to 12 weight. So this is a thicker thread. With thread, the bigger the number, the thinner the thread. So on your machine, you're using a 40 weight or 50 weight. It's a thin piecing thread. This is 8 weight or 12 weight, so it's a thicker thread. You can get Pro Cotton, which is one of these two. There's definitely different brands out there. This is a 12 weight. I believe this is a 12 weight as well. So there's those on the market. You can use some cotton threads, a cotton crochet thread, and a number 10 is going to give you around the same thickness. My preference is Orfil 12 weight. I really like the Orfil for several reasons. One is I found that they're really strong and durable. They don't shred. I've tried different kinds of thread that will, wherever your needle is, it starts to kind of shred that thread apart, which is not something that you want. So that, and then they last. There is a ton of thread on this spool. I'm able to get many quilts out of it. So it's nice to not worry about, well, how many of these do I have to buy to finish my quilt? I don't know. One spool of Orfil will be plenty for your quilt top. So I picked these 4 colors for my quilt top here today. I really like when picking colors for hand quilting, I like to contrast. I want you to see it. I spent all this time stitching it by hand. I'm not gonna hide that. I want you to see my quilting. So that's what I do. So I've chosen this blue, which we're gonna put on the outside here. You're gonna see it nice and pop. I've chosen this kind of seafoamy color, which I think I'm gonna put on this blue color down here. I've chosen this kind of like pinkish, I'm not really sure what color this is, as far as like colors on the color scale, but I really like it here. I think that it's interesting. If you looked at this thread, you might not think that it matches my quilt top, but when I put it down here as a single thread, it really pulls out the pink of the half square triangles and it really nicely fits. I also really liked this one. I thought that it was a nice mixture between the gold and the pink. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to use it. Might not use it, but I like to pull all my colors. I like to see what my options are before I get started. So we're going to start with the blue. I'm going to put the other ones aside. What else do I need for hand quilting? Well, there's only 3 more things that you need to make sure you have. A pair of scissors. It doesn't matter what scissors you have. I could be using my big quilting scissors. I like this little pair because it's easier to carry around with all my other things. A thimble and some needles. My preferred needles are milliner's needles. The reason being that the eye of the needle is small. This means that when I have a milliner's needle with some thread on it, so think about it, your thread is pretty thick, and if the eye of my needle was big, I would be getting a really bulky spot right where that, the eye and the thread meet. You've got 2 layers of thread. The bulkier the spot, when I'm going through all those layers and pulling, there's a chance that I'm going to pull up some of my batting along with my thread that's going to show up on the front of my quilt top. So that's always a concern with a bigger eye. That's why I really like milliners. I like that they are fairly rigid. I'm able to not worry about them bending on me. If you find that the eye of the milliners is a little small, they are pretty small to get to get this thread on there. I recommend embroidery needles as your next best thing. They have a bigger eye, but you're going to get about the same flexibility / rigidness of the needle and the sharpness, as well as the length. So that's another good one to look at. And then thimbles. So I really like this Clover all leather thimble. As you can see, this one's been well worn. Your thimble is going to sit on the middle finger of the hand that you're going to use to stitch. So make sure that it's got a comfortable, tight fit. If you don't have any thimbles and you want to get started today, and you have thread, you have needles, hopefully you have some scissors, stick a couple band-aids on your finger. That sounds kind of weird, I know, but where the padding of the band-aid is, stick it right here on the side. We're going to use this finger to help push that needle through all the layers. So it's really important to protect your finger. If you don't have a thimble, your finger's going to start to hurt after a while. You're not going to be able to stitch as long, and it's going to be sore for a couple days, so you're not going to be able to stitch tomorrow. So really, then you're, really waiting to be able to continue hand stitching. So stick a couple band-aids on there instead, or else experiment with different thimbles. There's silicone on the market, there's metal, there's leather with metal, there's silicone with metal, all sorts. Find the one that works best for you. This is the one that I like. So now we've covered all of the pieces that we need, and we are ready to start quilting. When I cut my piece of thread, I like to cut a piece of thread that's about 36 inches, about this length. The reason is, when you are stitching, you're going to have your thread mostly folded in half. So pretend my knot is here, I'm going to be using this to pull through. You want to be able to pull all the way up and have your thread be completely pulled. You don't want to do this whole thing where you pull all the way up, your thread is still loose, you have to come back and keep pulling at it. It just is going to slow you down. So don't make your thread too long. A lot of people recommend like 18 inches, which is so short, and I don't like tying knots. So I found 36 inches to be a good length for me. The side that I just cut off the spool, this is the one that is going to get the knot. Your thread is twisted right on a spool. This is going to be more, it's more than one piece of thread that's been wound and twisted together to make the weight that we need. Because it's twisted a certain way, it's going to glide through your fabric a certain way, which means that whatever end you cut off your spool, that's the one that gets the knot. I like to do just a simple knot, so looks kind of like a pretzel, right? Pretzel. You don't need your knot to be completely at the end. We're going to bury it into the layers. So it's okay to have a little bit of a tail. It's not a problem. And I like to double knot. We're going to start quilting. One thing to note, when I'm hand quilting, I always start and stop a ½ an inch from the edge of my quilt top. Why ½ an inch? Well, I don't want any stitches to be cut off when I am trimming my quilt and binding it. This is going to obviously be a problem because I don't want it unraveling. I've just worked so hard to get it to look really nice. I don't want it to end up unraveling. So if I go in ½ an inch, I'm ensuring that there's no way I'm going to be cutting that much off my quilt top. So that knot is going to be completely safe. I'm not going to have any chance of hitting it, snagging it, cutting it. My quilting is going to be secure. So not just the knot, but if I'm stitching, I'm going to stop ½ an inch before the edge and then, travel on to the next spot that I need to go. When you're trimming your quilt square, you can often end up trimming up to 1/8 of an inch off. So that leaves us 3/8 of an inch of play where from the end of our stitching to the end of our quilt top. That might seem like a lot of room, and you're saying, isn't that going to look silly? Well, no, because we have a 1/4 of an inch binding that we're going to add onto our top of our quilt top. So once that binding is on, that stitching is going to look like it just finishes right where your binding starts. When I'm starting, and I'm starting on an edge, so for example, I'm going to start right here. Instead of going through the back, pulling it in and burying my knot, because I'm on an edge, I'm going to lift up my batting exposing the layer between my batting and my backing. I'm going to slip my needle through and have it come up where I want it to start. I prefer to do this because in the center of my quilt, I will definitely be burying my knots into the layers, and I'll show you how I do that. But if I don't have to do it on the edges, I prefer not to. Okay, so right about here, so if you think about it, this is 1/4 inch, so that's about right, about 1/2 inch. I'm going to start. When I'm hand quilting, my needle is resting on the side of my thimble, right about like this, right? So it's being pinched by the pointer finger and the thumb. It's resting on my middle finger. My left hand is actually guiding the fabric. So you'll see I'm going to bunch the fabric up. I'm holding onto it. I'm going to help guide it onto that needle. So I'm going to go down, help guide that fabric back up in a rocking motion. You'll see that needle is resting on that thimble. The thimble is going to push the needle through so I can grab it on the other end and create my stitches. So again, the needle is sitting on our thimble. We're going to poke it in using that left hand to help guide the fabric where we want it to go. Push with the thimble and pull. So here we are. We've got a couple stitches down. You'll notice that now we have to go a different direction. So I picked this specifically because I want to show you, if you were doing a big quilt, what you would have to do. I could get one last stitch in, but then I have to go the other way. So what I need to do is I need to rotate my quilt top so that I'm always stitching in a direction that's favorable to me, which is away from me. Again, I'm going to bunch that fabric up with my left. My left fingers underneath are guiding the needle. So when I poke through, I can feel that needle come through with my finger. I'm not pricking my finger, but I know that it's coming through. That's making sure that I am hitting all those layers. I'm not accidentally missing the backing. Push with the thimble and pull. Down, up, down, up, down, up, and pull. You can choose to make your stitches as big or as little as you wish. Some people like really long chunky stitches, some people like shorter stitches. Mine tend to be a little under 1/4 inch. So this is the stitch length that I naturally gravitate to, so it's just become mine. Let's look at what it looks like on the back. So our stitches on the back look fairly similar to the front. You'll notice that this guy here is way smaller, this one, way smaller than the other ones. That's okay. So our backing, it's fine. If you accidentally skipped a stitch, it's fine. You don't have to go back and fix it. We just want to make sure that we are catching all of the layers and that our front is what we want them to look nice and even. As long as you're catching them on the back, you're good to go. I want to talk about a strategy for quilting when you're hand quilting. This is also a strategy that I use when I'm machine quilting. What I like to do is go in first and put what I like to call registration lines. So I'll go around the quilt top. So for example, we started here. I'm going to follow this all the way to the end here. Then I'm probably going to go ahead and do the same thing on all of them. So all the half square triangles that are pink are going to get outlined with my blue thread. Then I'm going to start on the corners. And I might do a couple lines here and a couple lines in the corner. A couple lines here, a couple lines in the corner. This is a smaller quilt. It's not as big of a deal. But let's say that this was a really big quilt. I would most definitely do a little bit, a little bit, a little bit, little bit, little bit, little bit, etc. And then I would come back in and I would fill in the areas in between. What that means is that even though I've nicely basted this, a lot of hand quilting, you'll notice just a little bit that we quilted. We started this way, we shifted the quilt top the other way, we shifted it back so we can start going this way again. I'm holding the quilt top, I'm crunching it up. You're manipulating that fabric a lot. And so by manipulating it a lot, things can shift and move on you. So it's really helpful to put in those registration lines. That way you know that nothing's moving, right? If you've got some stitching here, 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 it's not going to go anywhere. And then you can go in and you can fill in those areas in between. So that's just the strategy that I use a lot. I find that it just helps to keep everything nice and even where I want it to be, and it minimizes my frustration. And then another thing too that you might notice is I don't use a hoop. I don't like a hoop, mostly because I use my left hand so much to help me. So my left hand is gripping that fabric, it's guiding it through all those layers. A hoop would not allow me to do that. So the way that I hand quilt, I don't use a hoop. I don't use anything, I just have it really well basted and off we go. If it's a really big quilt, I might lay it on a table or on the floor and do my registration lines first. So where everything's nice and flat, I might do those registration lines, and then all those areas in between, then I'll take it and I'll snuggle up on the couch and do some hand quilting while I watch a video. So that's something that I employ as well, is just the idea that get those registration lines so nothing's moving, and then yeah, I sit on the couch and I snuggle and I hand quilt to my heart's content. So that's that. Let's talk about how to travel. Now, we're not talking about a vacation to Hawaii, although that would be really nice. No, traveling means to move between the layers of your quilt to be able to start in a different location. This is helpful if, for example, I have a lot of thread left on here, but maybe this is all I wanted to do out of blue. And now the next spot that I need to do out of blue is this spot right here. Well, I could tie a knot, bury it, create another knot, bury that knot, and start here. Very possible. I can also travel between the layers, which means that you won't see my thread on the top and you won't see my thread on the back. I'm going to move that needle within the layers of the batting to bring it to the spot that I want it to be. Traveling can happen two different ways. We'll talk about the easy way first. So for example, I'm right here. I need to travel to this spot right here. I want to always make sure that I'm traveling. I want to do my last stitch, and so I'm going to bring my needle down to create that stitch, but instead of going all the way down, I'm going to travel within the layers. So I use my left hand to just make sure that I can't feel that needle, that it is really secure, and then you'll see me kind of poke around to find that spot that I want to start back up on. Let's say it's right there. And then before I lift my needle, I kind of take a look and I say, okay, I can't see it on the front, I can't see it on the back, so that means I am in between those layers. I can go ahead and pull my needle up, and now I'm ready to start right here. So that's one way that you can travel between the layers. It's the easy way. It works for anything that's the length of your needle or shorter. Let's go back to that first example though. I'm right here, and the next spot that I need to quilt is right here. Well, that's like 3 needle lengths away. So how do I tackle that one? I'm going to do what I did for the first type of traveling, is I'm going to put my needle in. I'm going to angle it towards my destination. I know I'm not going to make it, but I'm going to angle it that way. With my left hand underneath, gripping that fabric, I'm going to help travel through those layers. I'm going to kind of scrunch it up a little bit. Let's see how much of it I can, how far I can get before I need to surface. Again, you can make sure you're not seeing it on the front or the back, that it's really in between those layers. And then I pull up. Now here's the tricky bit. We're going to go back down, and we want to make sure that we're in the same exact hole that we came up in, so that we don't have a little dot right here that shows our thread. I take my thread and I kind of pull it away so I can see where really it's living in that fabric, because fabric is woven, so you've got little holes in between those threads, and that's where your thread came up. Your thread's between the fabric, so that's where your quilting thread came up. So what you want to make sure is that you're going back down in that same hole. So I've got my needle down in that hole. I'm going to manipulate it through the layers, coming up where I need it to be. And when I pull through, that spot there disappears. because we went up and we went back down in the same hole, we didn't leave any sort of mark. Now my thread is right here and it's ready to start quilting that area. And on the back, oh, you'll notice we did get a little stitch here, so if I wanted to, I could go back and fix that. It's on the back, it's tiny, I'm not gonna worry about it. I would worry about it if it was a really long stitch that could get snagged. Otherwise, you're good to go. So that's how to travel between the layers so that you can get from one spot to another. This would be helpful on this quilt, for example, if I stitched all the way to here and I knew that I wanted to go all the way around this one, and maybe I don't want to have just a separate piece of thread just for this little square. I might stop here, travel, quilt this, travel back, and then continue on my way. Okay, let's talk about how to bury a knot. How to start in the middle, how to bury when you finished in the middle. That's the part that people, I think, get a little worried about because it makes this noise when you are popping it through the layers, and it's a little scary, but we got this, we got this. So I'm gonna have to do one last stitch. It's gonna go right here, so I'm gonna put a knot right about here. You don't want your knot to be too close to where that last stitch is. It's just, you want your knot to actually, when they say bury, they want it to go through that batting and really like secure itself within the layers of your fluffy batting. So for that to happen, we need a little bit longer than what our last stitch is going to be. Again, I just do a simple knot, nothing fancy, and I like to double knot. Okay, I'm going to go down, and just like we did for traveling, we're going to go through the layers a little bit. But this time, we're going to take our thread and our needle and we're going to poke it up through the back. So we traveled a little bit of distance away from where our last stitch was and pull it through the back. On the front, you'll notice there's my knot. When you are burying a knot, what you want to do is I like to hold fabric right near where that stitch is going to be. It just helps it to pop right into the layers. So you might have heard it. My knot because I was jabbering, but it just kind of popped right into the layers, and now it's in my batting. And I'm going to go ahead and clip my thread here. It's going to be a similar process for starting in the middle of your quilt top. So I've done a double knot. We are going to select to start on our center square. So I am going to, on my backing this time, insert my needle, travel a few, inch distance or so, and then I flip it over and just find out where that spot is that I want to start. That's a good spot. We'll start there. Pull that needle through. Alright, so here's my knot, and again, same thing. If you hold the fabric around it, it helps to pop in easier. So if I was just sitting here trying to do this, yeah, it gets a little like frustrating because you're like, it's not going in. But if you hold the fabric around it taut, you can just give it a nice pop. There we go. And it goes through the fabric layers. You'll notice that the tail of my thread is longer than my fabric, so my knot's buried. I can't pull it any further. It's nice and taut. So I have two options here. I can either cut it with scissors, snip, which is totally fine. What I like to do is I gently pull up the backing and then bury it in. So now our thread is here and we're ready to start hand quilting our little square. So just one more time to show you how that would look. I've got my left hand underneath, grabbing all those layers. We're now in the middle of our quilt, so you can see how all the layers are just kind of falling over my left hand. I just let them do their thing. I'm not worried about all this fabric here. It can bunch, it can, shimmy and do whatever. I've basted it, it's not gonna go anywhere. What I'm really worried about is keeping this area nice and flat for my stitching. My needle is going to rest on my thimble. I'm going to bring it down through those layers using my left hand to guide the fabric. My left hand is almost like working like an accordion, right? Like folding the fabric away and towards my needle. Push that through with that thimble and pull. I find that I can work from right to left and from towards me to away from me. But once I reach this part here, I can't work left to right, so I'm going to rotate my top. And I'm in a good spot now to be able to go away from me again. So this is a good spot to practice our traveling again. So we're gonna stick our needle into our fabric, our quilt top, travel between the layers until we come out at our next spot that we're gonna quilt. If we look on the back, we can see where we quilted it. There's that gap here. This gap happens because our last stitch we traveled. So we didn't finish and complete the stitch. We moved our needle across. That's totally fine. That's how it's supposed to look. You can see that some of mine are smaller and bigger stitches on the back. I don't worry about the back. What I worry is consistency on the front. So that's hand quilting 101. We covered the supplies that you need, how to prep your quilt top, how to make some stitches, how to bury your knots, how to travel, not to Hawaii, but I wish we were traveling to Hawaii, and everything in between. Be sure to check out my YouTube channel for more tips and tutorials. Also my blog where you'll find a ton more information. And if you like this bear path pattern and you want to make one too, you can find it in my shop in both paper and PDF formats. Thank you so much.